The boot connected with her temple before anyone could react. Staff Sergeant Maya Torres hit the ground, blood streaming down her face, while 47 recruits stood frozen in the Georgia heat. What happened next would force 3 generals to make an unscheduled visit to Camp Harrison within 90 minutes. But it wasn't the assault that shocked them. It was what they discovered when they started asking questions about the training methods that had been normalized for the past 6 years. The Alabama sun had a cruel way of pressing down on Camp Harrison. It didn't just shine, it punished. The morning heat baked the clay field until the air shimmered, and every breath felt like inhaling through sandpaper. Recruits slogged through the dust, sweat plastering their uniforms, boots pounding in rhythm with barked commands that cracked like whips. Staff Sergeant Maya Torres had been through worse climates: Afghanistan's deserts, Iraq's heat waves, the scorching training grounds of Fort Bragg. But there was something different about Camp Harrison's training yard. Here, the battle wasn't against the elements. It was against perception, against an entrenched culture that viewed her presence as a threat rather than an asset. She wasn't supposed to be there, at least not in the eyes of some of the instructors. Maya was a decorated combat medic with 3 tours behind her and scars etched across her skin like faded maps. She'd saved men twice her size under gunfire, pulled shrapnel from bodies while mortars screamed overhead, performed field surgeries in conditions that would break most people. She had 14 commendations, a combat medical badge, and the respect of every unit she'd served with overseas. But in this environment, none of that mattered. Here she was the anomaly, the woman, the veteran with too much experience for their liking, the soldier whose presence turned their comfortable hierarchy upside down. The whispers had started on day 1. She'd caught fragments as she walked past clusters of instructors. Doesn't belong here. Show off. Thinks she's tougher than the men. Probably slept her way to those medals. It didn't bother her at first. Combat zones had taught her the art of selective hearing, the ability to filter out noise and focus on the mission. Still, whispers have a way of growing sharp edges when they're repeated enough, when they're backed by looks of resentment and acts of subtle sabotage. This morning, the drills were particularly relentless. Bayonet practice. Aggressive, messy, designed to test not only endurance, but willingness to tap into violence. Recruits screamed as they lunged at dummies, rifles tipped with dull blades, slamming into sacks of sand and straw with grunts of exertion. Sweat soaked through fatigues, mixing with dirt until uniforms clung like second skin. The temperature had already hit 95 degrees by 09 a.m., and heat exhaustion was becoming a real concern. Maya moved through the drill with calculated precision. Her strikes weren't the loudest or the most dramatic, but they were efficient. Controlled bursts of energy, sharp thrusts that hit the target's weak points with surgical accuracy. A few recruits noticed, mimicking her rhythm, trying to replicate the economy of motion she demonstrated. Others glared, either jealous or resentful that a woman was outperforming them. The instructors noticed too. One in particular, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rollins, a thick-necked man with a voice like gravel and a temper that flared at the smallest provocation. He had been watching her all week, his eyes narrow, his remarks always laced with venom the others didn't receive. He had 18 years of service, most of it spent as an instructor at various training facilities, and he viewed the military as his personal domain, a place where his word was law, and questioning him was tantamount to insubordination. Too soft, not aggressive enough. Think you're special, Torres? His criticisms came constantly, loud enough for recruits to hear, designed to undermine her authority. Before we continue, please comment where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. She never flinched. She gave him nothing. No reaction, no defense, no acknowledgement beyond a crisp, "Yes, Sergeant," when protocol demanded it. And that, more than anything, seemed to infuriate him. Her composure was a mirror reflecting his own inadequacy, and he couldn't stand it. As the sun climbed higher, fatigue set in across the formation. One recruit, Private First Class Daniel Reeves, stumbled during a drill, his bayonet strike barely grazing the target. He wobbled, knees buckling under exhaustion, his face flushed dangerously red. The telltale signs of heat exhaustion were written all over him: the glassy eyes, the unsteady gait, the way his skin had gone from red to pale in seconds. Maya saw it instantly, the way his balance faltered, the way his eyes rolled slightly, the shallow, rapid breathing. Without thinking, operating purely on instinct, honed through 3 combat deployments, she stepped in, steadying him with one hand on his shoulder, the other checking his pulse at the neck. "You're overheating," she said quietly but firmly, guiding him upright and out of formation. Breathe through your nose, slow. We need to get you hydrated and cooled down. It was instinct. The medic in her never shut off, never stopped assessing threats to the soldiers around her. She'd seen too many young troops go down from heat injuries, seen how quickly it could turn fatal if not addressed immediately. That was when it happened. A blur of motion, a boot, cutting across her peripheral vision with terrible speed and intent. The impact exploded against her temple with a crack that made her vision stutter white, then red, then white again. Pain radiated through her skull like lightning, sharp and disorienting as she staggered sideways. One hand flew instinctively to her head, and warmth spread across her fingertips, blood already dripping down her cheek hot against her skin. Gasps broke across the field like a wave. The recruits froze mid-motion, bayonets hovering in the air, their faces masks of shock and confusion. The silence that followed was louder than any shout, heavier than any command. Even the ever-present Alabama wind seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Maya's body swayed, her equilibrium thrown into chaos by the blow, but she refused to collapse. Gritting her teeth against the pain that threatened to overwhelm her senses, she straightened slowly, forcing her legs to lock beneath her despite the way the world tilted and spun. She dragged her hand away from the wound, smearing blood across her jaw, and her eyes, dark and unflinching, locked onto Staff Sergeant Marcus Rollins. He stood there, boots still planted firmly in the dirt, chest heaving as if he'd just completed a sprint, as if daring her to react, to give him an excuse to escalate further. His smirk was faint, but carried an unmistakable challenge, a satisfaction that he'd finally broken through her composure. The message was clear, communicated without words but understood by everyone present. You don't belong here. Stay down. Know your place. Maya didn't blink. She didn't waver. I'm fine, she said, her voice low, steady, controlled despite the blood running down her face and the ringing in her ears. It wasn't meant for him. It was meant for the recruits who were watching with wide eyes, caught between fear and outrage, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. It was meant to show them that violence didn't have to break you, that dignity could survive even in the face of brutality. The field seemed suspended in time. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the hot wind whispering across the training ground, carrying with it the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. Rollins shifted his weight, as if satisfied with his display of dominance, but the stillness was broken by the sharp squawk of a radio. Lieutenant James Morrison, a junior officer who had been observing from the edge of the field, pale-faced and visibly shaken by what he'd just witnessed, keyed his radio with trembling hands. His voice cut through the tension, urgent and clipped. Command, this is Morrison at Training Field 7. We've got a situation. I repeat, assault incident at bayonet course. Senior NCO assaulted. Immediate response required. Request senior leadership presence immediately. The words traveled faster than the wind, faster than the whispers that were already beginning to circulate among the frozen recruits. Minutes later, exactly 14 minutes, though it felt like an eternity to those standing in formation, the grinding sound of engines echoed from the main gates. 3 dark SUVs rolled onto the field with purpose, tires kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the still air. Every recruit snapped to attention instinctively, spines rigid, rifles clutched tight against their chests. Even the instructors stiffened, though unease flickered visibly across their faces. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't normal. The doors opened in call. The first general, a woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing, stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had commanded thousands. General Patricia Vaughn. Her reputation preceded her, 22 years in command positions, zero tolerance for corruption or abuse, known throughout the Army for dismantling toxic leadership wherever she found it. Explain, she said, her voice not carrying anger but judgment. And judgment in the Army was heavier than artillery, more devastating than any explosive. Rollins shifted his weight, suddenly aware of the vast gulf between him and the 3 stars arrayed before him. The confidence he'd displayed moments ago evaporated like morning dew under scrutiny. Ma'am, I was testing her resolve, training discipline, building mental toughness. She was... Vaughn's hand shot up, cutting him off mid-sentence with a gesture that brooked no argument. Discipline does not come from cowardice or violence masquerading as instruction. Discipline comes from structure, from respect, from earned authority. Who authorized you to strike a senior NCO? Who gave you permission to assault a decorated combat medic? The field had gone deathly silent. 47 recruits barely breathed. Maya's head throbbed with a steady, pulsing pain that made it difficult to focus, but she refused to stagger, refused to show weakness. Her pulse raced not from pain, but from validation. Finally, after days of enduring subtle and not-so-subtle harassment, someone higher up was acknowledging the injustice, someone with the power to actually do something about it. "Lieutenant Morrison," Vaughn said, turning to the junior officer who had made the call. "Report everything you saw, every detail, every moment. Leave nothing out." The lieutenant's voice shook but remained precise as he recounted what he'd witnessed. Private Reeves stumbling from heat exhaustion, Maya stepping in with proper medical protocols, Rollins crossing the field at speed and delivering the kick without warning or provocation. Each word seemed to hang in the air, echoing off the dusty ground, building a case that would be impossible to dismiss or minimize. The generals conferred briefly among themselves, nodding in measured silence, their faces revealing nothing but their body language speaking volumes. Then the second general, a man with iron-gray hair and a reputation as a procedural specialist, gestured sharply to his aides who had emerged from the vehicles with cameras and recording equipment. "Document everything. Photograph the injury. We need eyewitness accounts from every trainee and every instructor present. I want written statements. I want photographs. I want a complete reconstruction of the timeline. Nothing is to be ignored. Nothing is to be swept under the rug." This stops now. For the recruits, the atmosphere was surreal, almost dreamlike in its intensity. Just hours earlier, they'd been enduring what they believed was normal hazing, the kind of harsh treatment they'd been told built character and resilience. Now the people they revered as untouchable leaders were under scrutiny, and the fallout could reshape not just this training program, but potentially influence policy across the entire army. Maya remained steady, drawing on reserves of composure built through years of high-pressure situations. When asked to provide her account, she recounted the events clearly, concisely, without embellishment. How she had observed Private Reeves showing signs of heat exhaustion, how she had followed established medical protocols by removing him from the drill, how Rollins had struck her without warning, and how the other instructors present had not intervened to stop the assault. She didn't add personal judgment or anger, just facts delivered in the flat professional tone of someone giving a mission debrief. Facts she knew were more dangerous to the guilty than any accusation shouted in rage. The generals nodded, listening intently, absorbing every word. The third general, a man known for his work in military justice, took careful notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated a thorough understanding of both military regulations and the nuances of the situation. Vaughn's eyes never left Rollins during Maya's testimony, watching his reactions, cataloging every micro-expression of anger, fear, and resentment that crossed his face. When Maya finished, Vaughn spoke directly to her, her voice carrying across the silent field. "Staff Sergeant Torres, you handled yourself with discipline and professionalism under circumstances that would have justified a much stronger response. Your adherence to your medical training and your composure following the assault are noted and commendable. The Army expects integrity even in the face of provocation and injustice. You will not be punished for defending a fellow soldier. You will not face retaliation. That is my personal guarantee." Maya blinked, fighting a surge of relief that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. Vaughn turned back to face the assembled instructors, her voice hardening. "This unit is temporarily suspended from all training operations. Every instructor will remain in place for the duration of the investigation. No one is to conduct drills, no one is to interact with trainees outside of supervised settings, and no one is to leave this installation without express authorization from my headquarters. Effective immediately. Staff Sergeant Rollins, you are relieved of all duties pending formal charges." Gasps rippled across the yard like wind through tall grass. The recruit's eyes widened in collective disbelief. Rollins's smirk vanished completely, replaced with a pale mask of panic as the reality of his situation began to truly sink in. He'd just assaulted a senior NCO in front of 47 witnesses and 3 generals. There would be no talking his way out of this. One of the aides, a young captain with a medical background, approached Maya with a comprehensive first aid kit, insisting she receive immediate treatment. She allowed it, sitting on the tailgate of one of the vehicles while the captain cleaned the wound, applied butterfly closures, and checked for signs of concussion. But even as the antiseptic burned against the gash on her temple, Her mind raced with the implications of what was unfolding. Courage wasn't only about surviving the battlefield, she realized. It was also about standing up inside a system built to reward conformity, a system that could be willing to punish strength and competence when it upset the established hierarchy, when it challenged the comfortable assumptions of those in power, tempered by respect, how to push soldiers to excellence without breaking them. Leadership is measured in respect earned, not fear instilled, she told one struggling instructor who had been present during the assault but had frozen, unsure how to intervene. The recruits need to trust you, not dread you. Fear produces compliance in the short term, but respect produces excellence that lasts a career. The cultural shift was subtle at first, but became more perceptible with each passing day. Recruits began taking initiative, asking questions without fear of mockery, assisting one another without waiting for permission. The atmosphere of collaboration and mutual support replaced the tense defensive energy that had dominated before, where every recruit was isolated and competing against each other for survival. During one afternoon drill, a complex tactical movement exercise, Maya walked alongside recruits, correcting posture with gentle adjustments, demonstrating technique with practiced efficiency, offering encouragement that was specific and meaningful rather than generic praise. She noticed Private Chen, a slight young woman who had been struggling with confidence, faltering mid-maneuver and stepped in immediately. "Adjust your stance. Widen your base. You've got the control now. I can see it. Apply it with confidence. Focus on the fundamentals we practiced." Chen's next movement was precise, executed with newfound confidence, and she glanced at Maya with grateful acknowledgement that spoke volumes. Around them, other recruits followed suit, motivated by the visible leadership Maya embodied. Not leadership through intimidation or volume, but through competence, patience, and genuine investment in their development. Meanwhile, administrative reviews continued in parallel with the training reforms. Rollins was relieved of all instructional duties and reassigned to administrative work pending formal court-martial proceedings. Other instructors who had been present but failed to intervene faced formal letters of reprimand and mandatory retraining on proper leadership techniques and recognizing abuse. The message was clear and unambiguous. Accountability was absolute, and rank or tenure provided no immunity from ethical standards. General Vaughn called Maya into a private meeting in the temporary headquarters set up in one of the administrative buildings. The air conditioning was a welcome relief from the Alabama heat. "Staff Sergeant Torres," Vaughn began, her voice measured and professional. "The unit is already responding positively to the changes we've implemented. Your guidance is having a tangible effect that exceeds our initial projections. I want you to understand something. Changing military culture is far more difficult than any combat operation. Combat has clear objectives, defined enemies, measurable outcomes. Culture is amorphous, resistant, deeply embedded. What you've accomplished here in less than 2 weeks is remarkable." Maya nodded, recognizing the truth in the general's words. Combat had tested her physical endurance and mental acuity in ways that left scars both visible and invisible. But changing human behavior, reshaping institutional culture, required a different kind of resilience, one that demanded patience, unwavering clarity, and principles that couldn't be compromised or negotiated away. "The work ahead is significant," Vaughn continued. "We're implementing new oversight protocols, mandatory reporting systems, regular psychological evaluations for instructors, and anonymous feedback mechanisms for trainees. Your input will be invaluable in shaping these programs. We want to ensure that what happened to you never happens to another soldier at any training facility in the United States Army." By the second week following the incident, morale across the unit had noticeably improved in ways that were measurable and observable. Recruits reported feeling safer in anonymous surveys. Instructors were more thoughtful and deliberate in their methods. The culture of intimidation dissipated further with each passing day, replaced by something that resembled what military training should have been all along: challenging but fair, demanding but respectful, designed to build soldiers up rather than break them down. During breaks between training evolutions, recruits began approaching Maya with quiet gratitude that they had previously been too afraid to express. "Staff Sergeant," one said, a young man from rural Tennessee, "we've never had a training environment like this before. It's actually easier to focus, easier to learn when you're not constantly worried about being humiliated or hurt." Another added, a woman from California who had been considering requesting a transfer before the incident, "You make us want to get it right, not just avoid punishment." That's a completely different mindset, and it changes everything about how we approach training. Maya acknowledged them with nods, understanding that her presence had become as much symbolic as practical. She didn't seek praise or recognition. Those had never been her motivations. She sought change, systemic and lasting, and that change was finally taking root in soil that had been hostile for far too long. As evening approached at the end of the second week, the generals made a final official visit to witness a capstone exercise, a complex, multi-phase simulation that tested leadership, teamwork, tactical decision-making, and grace under pressure. The unit executed flawlessly, demonstrating the kind of cohesion and competence that had been impossible under the previous culture of fear. Commands were clear and acknowledged promptly. Coordination was seamless. Morale was genuinely high rather than falsely performative. General Vaughn approached Maya privately afterward, away from the others, as the golden light of the setting sun painted long shadows across the training yard. "Staff Sergeant Torres," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that was rare in military interactions, "you have accomplished something truly extraordinary here. You've set a standard that will be studied at the War College, that will be referenced in leadership courses, that will influence training programs across every branch of the service. This isn't hyperbole, it's recognition of impact." Private Chen approached her quietly, speaking with the kind of reverence usually reserved for combat veterans. Maya placed a steady hand on the young woman's shoulder. "The change is real, because you all made it possible by choosing to embrace it. Leadership is not about fear or control. It's about responsibility, about lifting others up, about creating conditions where people can excel. Remember that principle as you continue your journey here and beyond. Pass it forward." Later, she returned to her quarters, finally removing her uniform and carefully cleaning the healing wound on her temple. The ache from the kick had faded to occasional twinges, replaced by deep, quiet satisfaction that came from knowing she had made a difference that would outlast her time at Camp Harrison. What had begun as a violent personal confrontation, as an act of intimidation designed to put her in her place, had instead catalyzed systemic change that would protect countless future soldiers from similar abuse. As night fell over Camp Harrison, the stars appeared above in their ancient configurations, glimmering steadily against the vast darkness. Maya stood by her window, looking out over the training yard that had been transformed from a place of fear into a place of genuine development, reflecting on everything that had happened. The Army had been reminded, forcefully and undeniably, that leadership was not about fear or control, but about influence, respect, and unwavering commitment to principles that transcended rank or personal convenience. In that quiet moment, with the night sounds of the base settling around her, the distant sound of taps being played, the murmur of conversations winding down, the rhythmic footsteps of security patrols, Maya understood with absolute clarity that her impact would extend far beyond this unit, far beyond Camp Harrison, far beyond even her own military career. One act of courage, one refusal to remain silent in the face of injustice, one decision to stand firm even when struck down, had reshaped countless lives, had established new conduct standards that would be written into policy, and had proven beyond any doubt that integrity could triumph over intimidation. That truth could overcome institutional inertia, that one person standing in the right could move mountains. And in the deep silence of the Alabama night, Staff Sergeant Maya Torres allowed herself a rare, genuine smile. The unit had been transformed, justice had been served, and a legacy of leadership, respect, and accountability had been firmly, permanently established. A legacy that would endure long after she had moved on to her next assignment, carried forward by the soldiers whose lives she had touched and who would, in turn, touch others.